I mean, luckily I didn't forget this time, that we'll just generate some sense of a mindset that's productive for spending the time together for the next hour. And of course, you can expand that to the whole day, to your whole life, whatever you like. But it is what makes, in fact, what we know about whatever we know about Buddhism and Buddhist psychology. When we talk about karma, we have one description of the mind is one description or one scheme that's often talked about or is referred as the 51 mental factors, and we talk about the 6 consciousnesses and things like that. So in that description in the mind, in the function of the mind, we have what's called the 5 always present mental factors, or usually referred as omnipresent mental factors. And in the 5 omnipresent mental factors, or always present mental factors, I probably referred to those before in this class, not sure. So those are always, because the mind is always in experience, it's always experiencing, then even when we're asleep, even with a coma, even in the transition of dying and death and in intermediate state, there's still a mind that's experiencing all that. And we could say that's me, so to speak, right? That's what we identify as me. And these 5 omnipresent mental factors always have to be there in order to have an experience. You can't have an experience without these mental factors. So one of the mental factors that's always present is intention. And intention is sort of this function of the mind that moves us to one object to the other. In order for me to look away and look out my window, there is an intention there. Now, it's not the common sense of intention, like I intend to go to lunch after this class. It's not at that level. It's a more subtle level, of course. So it's what moves the mind towards its object, we could say. So intention, when we ask, well, where does karma reside? Because karma is mostly a mental phenomenon. And as a mental phenomena, then it has to reside, it's a function of the mind. So generally speaking, karma is this intention, okay? So it means we're always making karma, we could say too, at some level, even if it's very subtle, even if it's neutral. So that's why setting our motivation or intention before doing anything, it changes the karma. The action. For the most part, when we do an action, we're not really aware of any intention, right? Or maybe the intention is, I don't know, to feel better or to understand something, so that we feel better, that sort of thing. So just for a moment, you can direct the intention that for this time that we spend together, at least, think what kind of intention would be more productive. And the more productive intention would be that this time together produces the result of a further understanding of our own nature and the nature of reality. So, because by understanding the nature of reality is the path, the mechanism for attaining liberation, enlightenment. And enlightenment and liberation are the qualities of a happy existence. So in other words, we'll sit together, we'll think about things, reflect, meditate, talk, is for the purpose of attaining the full awakened mind. And then just achieving that for our own welfare seems sort of selfish. So we think, I really want to help others. We have a lot of friends, family, and people just in general that we want to create better conditions for. But we can't really do that without a wise mind and ultimately an awakened mind. So we're also directing our awakening towards being of the greatest benefit to other living beings, all living beings. Okay. Okay. So last week we ended, excuse me, we ended sort of here at these last couple ideas. We talked about how the mind and how the ego makes a wrong projection, you remember? And I think I was just giving you an explanation about how perception and experience, again, we talk about experience, just like we have those 5 omnipresent mental factors, those that's getting, that's kind of more detailed. But in every experience, perception, mental, every experience with the 5 senses, the mental consciousness, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. We need an object. So there's always an object. Okay. And the objects are going to fall into either, excuse me, the objects are going to fall into either the 5 objects of the physical senses connected with corresponding consciousness. So we have three interactive, interrelated qualities. We have an object. So we'll just take like a tree. That's a sight. And then we have an eye, eye organ. And then we have to have, so just having a tree and an eye organ, there's not experience yet, right? It's pretty logical, but I think we don't usually think about it. So there has to be an experiencer. So there's no tree, right? There's no tree without a consciousness. And the ear or sound consciousness doesn't see a tree. Ear or sound consciousness hears the tree falling, and when it falls. Okay. Now, of course, you can also see the tree fall. But if you see the tree fall like from far away and you don't hear anything, then the sound consciousness is not functioning. Okay. It's just dormant. Interestingly, these 5 consciousnesses, the sight, sound, smell, olfactory, tactile, are sometimes referred to as dumb. The reason they're dumb is they just are kind of like mirrors. They don't have much, they're just bare perception. They experience the object barely. So when the tree falls and you hear it, and then the thought, that's a loud noise, and you kind of step back or something, that's where the mental consciousness is involved. Okay? Makes sense? So now when we die and we go into the intermediate state, or when we're asleep and dreaming, then it's just the mental consciousness functioning there. The mental sense and the mental consciousness with the mental object. Okay? Yeah.
Ask a question?
Yes, please.
So if sometimes there's a sound and we don't register it.
Correct.
For example, if you're sitting in your house and there's traffic noise outside, you don't register the sound. So that means that neither the mental consciousness nor the sound consciousness are operative. Would that be accurate?
That would be, there's one kind of awareness, it's called inattentive. And it's possible that through inattentive awareness that you're registering it, but you're not aware of it.
Okay.
So it is possible. It's like when you're walking down the street and you're not noticing the people around you. You're walking past the lamp and the people, and there may be a perception of them, right? But we're not aware of it.
Okay.
So there could be, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. That's interesting because later, not in this class, but there's a classification of teachings called the ways of knowing. And there's called the 7 ways of knowing. I don't get too technical again, but they're very fascinating because of the 7, only 2 of them are valid. Okay. The other are things like that inattentive one, and that you still know something, but it's not what they call bare. It's not fresh. Okay. So yeah. It's kind of the same thing, Anil, when we're asleep at night. We could be registered, but the mental sense conscious is not active in those perceptions. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's right. You can double check that, but yeah, check to see if I got that right. So when we talked about this is the end of last week. As Lama Yeshe in this book, Ego, Attachment, and Liberation, the reason he's talking about ego and attachment, he often refers to the ego and attachment are the two departments. It's because they are always working together. Ego in the sense of, as I define it at one point, I think what Lama is referring to is ignorance, or the normal conventional mind that sees things incorrectly. And if we see things correctly, attachment will not follow. But we don't see things correctly, so attachment spontaneously follows. Attachment. And this attachment is not like, oh, I love vanilla ice cream. That is an attachment. It happens at the very, very kind of micro level as well. Okay, it happens instantaneously with every perception, basically. Now, sometimes it's very subtle. It's not very pronounced. It's not even damaging, but it's still there. Okay. And it gets stuck. Now, for normal usage, why this is important is because I'll be looking at the tree, and if it's just in the realm of bare perception, and no attachment is coming up, but attachment immediately rises. So looking at a tree, I get a sensation that it feels good. It's a pretty tree. That's the attachment being activated. And then I think about how my neighbors are blocking my view because they're not cutting the trees. And then, so then I get upset by them not cutting the trees, and it explodes on like that. But it explodes from a very subtle state, right? Just looking at the tree, and then someone comes up next to you and says, wow, they're really blocking your view, aren't they? That's right. And then the thing just begins to explode. It begins to become exaggerated. And that's the mind that we possess in general. And that is a mind that we would say is not in control, right? This is very, very important to understand, because this is what distinguishes us as Buddhist followers, is just the fact that we understand that the mind is we're not in control of the mind. The mind is sort of, quote, out of control. It's controlled by what? It's controlled by the ego and attachment, by ignorance and attachment. And this happens constantly, all the time. And it's very hard to resist. It's very hard to stand up to it. But the process of Buddhist practice is exactly that. It's really, if you think about the process of Buddhist practice, is that it's to get control of the mind. And the beautiful thing is that we have the potential to do that. Okay. Now, I don't know if you've heard, about the traditional teachings about avoiding rebirth in the lower realms, right? That's talked about quite a bit. All we need to do the first thing we need to sort of understand is why the lower realms, assuming they exist, and we can talk about that, but let's assume they exist. Well, we can tell the animal realm exists, right? That's right in our perception. We don't know, maybe spirits are in some people's perception, and then the hell realms are very subtle, so they're difficult. But you can always think about from the point of view of logic, we can begin to talk about the possibility of these lower realms. But either way, if you just go to the animal realm, you can tell that you can surmise that the level of control for an animal seems to be absent, the potential. We've never once, I don't think, seen an animal take control of its mind and decide to, work at being a happier animal or something. You know what I mean? It's mostly just impulsive. Of course, I'm generalizing, and there's levels, different levels of animal minds. There's everything from dolphins and porpoises to, to barnacles, right? They're all animals. Dolphins and chimpanzees down to, plankton and ants and mosquitoes, and they're all animals. It's funny when we talk about the animal, most people sometimes protest because, we're painting the animals as sort of a negative thing. And they say, things about, well, I'd love to be a hawk, they can fly and all that kind of stuff. But, or your dog. But, remember I mentioned a week or two ago that I did research on the number of mosquitoes in the world. And the number was 7 or 70, I can't remember, quintillion. That's just mosquitoes. So when you talk about, not you, but when one talks about their cat, it looks like a pretty good life. What are the chances if you take rebirth in the animal realm, what's the chances you're going to be born a cat in someone's house who's kind to you? Statistically, I think it's not measurable, right? It'd be measurable to say you'd be born a mosquito more than a cat. And then we have the same number of ants, and we have the same, and plankton, and who knows? It's mind-boggling. It's actually not just mind-boggling; it's kind of disturbing. So when you're born, so the chance of being born a mosquito is really, I think, worth just contemplating on, as a meditation, as an inspiration for us. And you think, well, as a mosquito, yeah, it seems I won't have any control. Correct? We have to just use our critical thinking as best we can and just reflect on that. So, of course, we can't go into the mosquito's mind, and maybe the mosquito's practicing meditation. Or that's what people sometimes say. But, you have to be a little bit discriminating. And I would say, well, I'd rather not take the chance. I'd like to be a human being, because you can feel that the human possibility is much more tangible. The human potential feels to me extraordinarily not even measurable in terms of its potential versus a chipmunk. Okay. So our goal in this life, so to make life meaningful, is to begin to understand how the mind works and how our potential works. Correct? And if we're not intent on actualizing our potential, then how are we different than animals? That's a question. I'd like to, if anyone has anything to say. Maybe you don't. But how is it different? Just reflecting for a minute. If we don't attempt to get control of the mind, and instead of letting the mind, in this case, it's not just the mind, but the afflictions, we call them, or the confusions, run the show, attachment and ego, how are we different than animals? Yes, Barbara?
We're no different.
We don't, I agree. We don't, but typically we don't think about that, and I'm talking about we do, but in general, common people, we don't have that question come up, do we?
I have a question, Karuna. First of all, I had a procedure on my tongue yesterday. Oh. Speech is a little bit weird.
Sure.
But the question that I have is, the mind that I currently have, was that of an animal how many times over? So when I'm in the body of an animal, when that's my form, all the higher levels of my mind, are they just dormant for that period of time? Because it's the same mind.
Yeah.
And granted, my mind is always changing, but what happens to those higher functions of my mind when I was in an animal body?
Okay. When you had when you had your procedure yesterday, and I'll just project, okay? I'm not, just When you had your procedure today, were you able to access your higher potential of your mind?
Absolutely.
Oh, you could?
Yeah.
Oh, that's good. Okay, that bad example then. How about when, that's not fair. So the point, when you've been upset or going through a crisis, you know, we can't access our higher potential, right? It's very tough. Eventually we will be able to. Maybe you can, but in general, right? We're under the control of that crisis or that emotional state, right? So we still have the potential hasn't gone away, but we're overwhelmed by the state of mind that arises. So an animal is just a state of mind, right? It's just a state of mind, and it's typified by not having control. It's typified by what was referred to as kind of ignorance or impulsivity, right? It's just on autopilot, looking for food. Right? I got chipmunks that go along my squirrels rather go along my railing here, and you know, if you really watch them, they're single focused on not getting captured by a hawk, because we have hawks around here, and finding an acorn or food. And it doesn't stop, right? And even its body twitches all the time. It's like looking, twitching. So yes, it has the potential. And you could say, even for an animal, because it has that potential, it could attain enlightenment. But the odds are so slim that it, you know, I don't know if there's any animal that attained enlightenment. I guess you could say must have been, you know, the universe is a huge place, but you don't want to risk that. There was one disciple of the Buddha who was very well, ignorant, you know, very, you know, he didn't have any intellectual capacity. He was very, what do you call that? I don't know what they say, developmentally delayed. I don't know, you know, and yet, you know, Buddha would teach him one line, a verse in the morning to memorize, but the monk would forget it by the afternoon. And this went on for weeks, months, years, whatever. So finally, the Buddha said, but this monk every day would sweep the temple. Okay, so the monk's mind was a bit like an animal mind, right? We could say, but you know, having skillful means, the Buddha knew how that monk could access his potential. So what he taught him was, when he was sweeping, he says, I can't remember exactly what it was, something like he was able to memorize by sweeping out the delusions, sweeping in the qualities, something like that. And he memorized, and he attained liberation. So because he had access to his potential, and because the Buddha knew skillful means, and that's one of the things we achieve by attaining enlightened mind, we're really able to know how to help people. So yes, it becomes dormant. Because you and I have been humans countless times, and we've been chipmunks or squirrels countless times. So we do, that's why it's called samsara, is referred to as a circle. It's a cycle, right? Yeah. So that's the good news. We don't lose it. We don't lose the potential, but we get obscured. We can't access it. Okay.
Thank you. That makes sense.
Okay, thanks. And then you just check, and if you know, something, you know, doesn't feel right about that, then we'll talk about it some more. Okay. I know it's long, you know, I try not to do these long statements, but I'm going to read this because I was touched by it when I read it earlier. The most important thing is to dedicate whatever you do to others. This is of prime importance, not emotionally. Oh, I'm on Lama's Tibetan Buddhist trip. But by recognizing that attachment is the root of every problem that you have ever experienced from the time you were born up until now. Mahayana Buddhism stresses the importance of the pure thought of bodhicitta above all else, and complains bitterly about how attachment is the worst problem of all. But there's a vast amount of psychological explanation behind these statements. I can't explain it all to you in just 5 days. Nevertheless, Nevertheless, you need to know that Mahayana Buddhism does contain such wonderful teachings on human psychology. That's why I, I'm so fascinated with this, these ideas, particularly because when you think of it as psychology, well, psychology means the study of the mind, correct? So I have a degree in clinical psychology, and then I'm a clinical psychologist or psychotherapist. So in my clinical psychology, it seems like if you're studying psychology, one should, so psyche is the study of the mind. Anybody else have any background in psychology? No? If you're, anyone have like a higher degree like that, a medical degree or something like that? Yeah, Barbara, what do you have?
I'm retired now, but I was a clinical nurse specialist.
A what?
Clinical nurse specialist.
Okay, clinical nurse specialist. So as a nurse, you received you're studying nursing. So it was explained to you about pathology and disease and things like that, and curative. So you kind of knew what you're focused on the body, right? I mean, for the most part, focused on the body. So you learned what veins were and arteries were and what heart was and what a brain, well, not a brain, but, limbs and muscles and how they function, right? So you're probably clear. No one had to tell you what an arm was, right? You knew what an arm, and then they broke it down for you that it had veins and muscles and tendons and bones and all that sort of thing, or whatever part of the body. So in terms of the body, it could be defined pretty easily, I think. And it's a complex mechanism, but you weren't confused as to when they said, you're here to treat the body, so to speak. So in psychology, you're being in psychology or psychotherapy, which is the treatment of the psyche. If I were to ask you guys and gals, if I were to ask you, okay, Louis, your job, you're a psychologist, so you're a psychotherapist, so you're going to treat the mind, right? That's the definition. And I said, okay, quickly tell me what's the mind that you're treating. Could you tell me as a Western psychologist? I mean, your title is psychologist, so you're a student of the mind and you're the psychotherapist, so you're...
Wouldn't it depend on what school I was in?
Okay,
but what I thought the mind was.
Right, it would depend on that. And if one school says the mind is your nose, is that okay?
I wouldn't belong to that school, sorry.
Well, it's almost as bad as that, because all the schools. So how do you?
Sorry.
All the schools do say have a different opinion about the mind, right?
Yeah.
So, but isn't the mind something that is not? It's something that exists. So why would there be arguments about what it is? I mean, I'm not talking about the subtleties of it, but one in our discussion here, it's not beyond reason to say that one school could say the mind is the nose, right?
That is true.
That's true, right? So one says the mind is the nose, one says the mind is the ego and the id, and one says, so they have these labels, but they don't agree.
No, they don't.
So if Barbara went in her nursing field and she thinks she has to help someone, give someone an injection, But she thinks that the way you give it is in the toenail, not toe, but then the toenail. You know, that doesn't work, right? We know what a vein is. A vein, everyone will agree on what a vein is. But everyone's not agreeing on what the mind is in modern psychology. How do you treat something if you don't know what it is?
You just hope for the best. and you try not to make it worse.
Well, I appreciate that. And I also appreciate that psychologists and psychotherapists are trying their best, and their intentions for the most part are to help. But we're going a little more critically here and deeper, that to really help, you have to know what the thing is. Because how do you know you're being helpful? So there's my teachers often laughed about in the early days of in the 60s, 70s, 80s of psychology, maybe still today, that the way to deal with your anger was to beat pillows. Do you remember that?
Yeah. I remember the cold pricklies and the
primal scream, primal scream.
All that. Yeah.
So that's from not understanding what the mind is. And then, of course, anger is a mental factor, right? I'm not talking about some alleviation. That of course, maybe screaming or hitting pillows gets the stress out of you. I understand that. We're talking about cure. I mean, a psychologist is in for the cure, should be in for the cure, not just the alleviation of the symptoms. Okay? But most of it now is symptom relief, isn't it? So Buddhist psychology is not really that sympathetic to symptoms. A little bit. But my experience is when I have some trouble and problem and I go to talk to my teacher about it, in the past, they weren't very warm and fuzzy. You know, they didn't pat me on the back, say, it'll be okay, just go take a few days off and go to a spa. I wish they had said that. Lama Yeshe, if I was like that, you know what he would do? He'd get like more strict and more abusive. I'm saying abusive, it's not really abuse, you know, more intense, kind of like quit being a baby, you know, quit whining, kind of a thing. And of course, some people he wouldn't do that to. For me, I guess I was a big whiner, so he just, you know, would always, you know, come in with the tough love. And no one loved me more than he did. He loved me even more than my mom, I would say. So yeah, you know, symptom relief. Of course, we need symptom relief. We need emergency room doctors and nurses, of course. And same thing, if someone's suicidal, their mental state is so lost that you don't teach deep philosophical topics to the person. You give them some comfort and you give them some hope and you give them, you know, so that you can then go on to the deeper. So we have, of course, skillful means is that we don't, you know, this is the thing that bothers me amongst my Buddhist friends when you're going through something hard and then they'll say, oh, it's just, you know, you just told them, oh, I got cancer. I don't know if I can recover. Oh, it's just your karma. Oh, everything's impermanent. Oh, you know, it must be for a reason. You know, those things might be right. They're just not helpful, right? So Buddha did say, speak the truth, but speak what's helpful. And we miss that second part a lot of times. Speak what's true, but speak what's helpful. Okay.
I have a question. What's wrong with saying it happens for a reason? Because I kind of, I say that myself too. So I'm struggling with
that. Is it helpful for the person?
Oh, I say it to myself. I don't say it
to yourself. Well, let me ask you something, Vanessa. So what does it mean it happens for a reason? What do you think?
It means just accept it and there's something to learn out of it.
So so you and I agree that it happens for a reason because it's cause and effect, right?
Yes.
So let's say you get bonked on the head by a few weeks ago, we're walking over at Land of Medicine Buddha with a friend and my wife was like 5, 6, 7 feet behind us. And all of a sudden this thing hits her head, drops from the trees. I was walking with one of our monk friends, you know, and all of a sudden she says, "Oh," I can't tell you what she said because it was spontaneous, right? It starts with an F. Oh, because it was just so, it just hit her on the head. And it was an acorn that was dropped by a squirrel. And so Vanessa, that acorn dropped on her head for a reason. Yes, it had a cause. It was her head. She experienced the pain. So when you say for a reason, I would say it happened due to a cause. And she created the cause, not me, because I didn't experience it. Okay. Now, so when the second part of what you said, so there's something I need to learn from it. Is that what you said?
Yeah, something to gain out of it.
That's a choice. And that's a good choice. But it doesn't mean that it happened intentionally for you to learn something. It happened intentionally due to cause and effect, yes. But with a purpose, you need to learn. Now, it could happen like your spiritual teacher could be rough with you or whatever, take your tea away from you or something. And that could be for a reason, yes. But if you're on your own, then it happened for a reason is up to you. That's up to you, right? Yeah, that's up to you. And there's you're right. There's a lesson to be learned every instant. And I think that as we get more, develop our spiritual qualities, the inner potential, then everything becomes a teacher. You're right. Every instant, we say every instant is our guru manifesting for us. So there's nothing, it's very good to say, but to say it must be for a reason. You make the reason. Other than the cause effect. Yes, cause effect. And so good. That's what really Dharma practice is making making a meaningful reason from it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I don't know if you agree, but
yeah, I sometimes I get too cosmic about it. I think maybe that's when I start getting myself into wishful thinking.
Well, the common phrase is last some years is what is it? Like, well, if it's going to happen, the universe will make it happen. Remember that one? Something like that. The word universe is used. And that doesn't resonate for me because I don't know what that means. Like there's an intelligence, or is it just physics? I mean, I don't ask people because I don't know what they mean. Sometimes I think they mean if they mean the universe is going to, and then it sounds a bit like God, just a substitute for the word God, or they mean it as just physics, just the natural play of the physical elements, right? And which means there's no intelligence behind it, by the way. So if there's intelligence, then it sounds like God. If there's no intelligence, then it's just laws of physics, basically. Anyway, I digress. I don't mean to pop your bubble. Okay. Those are just my opinions, by the way, you people. Like I said, I can be wrong. I'm wrong all the time, according to my wife. So don't worry. And my kids. Okay. So with impermanence, these are some, again, we talked quite a bit about impermanence, not quite a bit, but we have touched on it, haven't we? And the idea of impermanence, for me, it's one of the most important laws that we are not aware of. Okay, we're not aware of, I mean, in terms of our natural perception. We're aware of it intellectually. So as I put there, intellectually we accept it, but naturally we reject it. And with impermanence, we're probably more focused on the subtle impermanence. I think gross impermanence, we all have an acceptance of. You know, I'm going to have to get a new car in X amount of years because my car is impermanent, right? The definition of impermanence, again, as I mentioned, I think one of the classes, is that which is produced. It's very, very important to sort of grasp this idea, that which is produced. One of the quality of impermanence, subtle impermanence, is something that changes from instant to instant, right? So for me to get a new car, have to get a new car in 8 or 9 years or whatever it is, because it's impermanent, because, you know, the paint's going to be all chipped and the seats are going to be torn and the engine's going to be overworked and falling apart, right? We see the end result of the car and we say, yeah, cars are impermanent, the house is impermanent, life is impermanent, you know, because we see I'm going to become old, right? That's not, that's a very important expression of impermanence, but not really the one we're after. Okay, it's a good one. It's a stepping stone for sure, because if we see the end of our car in 8 whatever years, right? Or even like, you know, that feeling when you get a new car, right? Or a new friend or new computer. If you see the decay of that computer the moment you buy it, and you sort of project out into the future, there's less attachment that arises. The attachment meaning clinging attachment. You know, take the new car, how exciting, you know, exciting new car. You just got your new Tesla, you know, and there's sort of a buzz that goes on, right? There's a buzz that happens when it's right there in the store, in the showroom or whatever. You know, you can apply this to whatever is relevant for you. You know, whether it's a new meal that you've never tried, a new restaurant, doesn't matter. In all of these things, that restaurant, when you go into that restaurant, it flashes in front of your perception as something permanent. And people will say, if you say, hey, you know, guys, don't get so excited about the food here because we're all going to be leaving in an hour and a half. We're going to be going back to our houses, and then tomorrow morning we'll get up and work. So this whole experience of the food is really, you know, impermanent. First of all, people would be upset with you because you're killing the buzz. But if you see things that way, don't you walk into the restaurant slightly different? In other words, yes, we're trained that it's more fun to be attached. We're trained to be that it's more fun to have the ego involved. So when you walk into the restaurant, it's a new restaurant, and if you were to say, you know, guys, don't get so into this, we're going to be leaving in an hour and a half, people would be upset with you because the focus, the wrong philosophy is that the restaurant and the food, what we're doing is to make me happy. So it's a wrong intention, isn't it? And now we think, well, God, you're taking away all the fun in life, which is not true, because you're taking away all the suffering too. That's not real fun, because suffering arises when you finish your meal and you're going home and you go, God, I just wish we could have stayed another half hour there. Or maybe we'll come back Friday night. Or maybe, I don't know why the steak was overcooked, right? All these things because of not being aware of gross impermanence, first of all. So if we're aware of the gross impermanence of our car, you know, we'll be a little more tempered, because we know the moment we buy the car, it's going to start disintegrating, right? That's subtle impermanence. Subtle impermanence, there's no fixed car there to be excited about. There's no fixed restaurant there to be excited about. You can't find the fixed restaurant because everything in your experience, in my experience of the restaurant, there is nothing that's not moving instant to instant, is there? So if you think of it like flowing water or mist, let's say it's a river going past you. There's nowhere you can put your thumb on and fix it, is there? What do you fixate to? It's already moved and the atoms are all of the water, the atoms, the drops are made up of smaller drops, and the smaller drops are made of smaller drops. And you say, wow, what a beautiful, what great restaurant, which I'm using metaphor of a river, because it's like a river. That restaurant, the moment you walk in, everything you see is already gone, isn't it? And you're in your next perception. Is that right? All the atoms have changed. All the molecules have changed. You've changed. Your mind is not static. Your mind is moving. Where is the fixed part that we're going to cling to? So ignorance or ego goes, oh, no, don't think about that. Think about what a great restaurant this is. And you know how much you love sushi, and this is one of the best sushi restaurants around. And there's no great sushi restaurant there other than a mental projection, right? Can you see that? So we're in love or enthralled with the mental projection, not with the restaurant. And if you're with Lama Zopa Rinpoche and he says to you something like, stop relating to your mental projection and just see what's really there. And what's really there, part of what's really there, it's not the deepest understanding, what is that this is a moving experience. The sounds are changing moment to moment. The forms being recorded by your eyesight changing moment. The aromas are changing moment to moment. But we fix it, go, oh, doesn't that smell good? Right? Where is the good that we're smelling if it's changing? So it's okay to appreciate, by the way, it's not taking away the appreciation of beauty. It's just understanding that it's moving. So if it's moving, how do we cling to it? And as Lama says, when we embrace impermanence, everything becomes easygoing. Of course it does. So when we're worried about a presentation we have to make, when we're worried about an interview, when we're worried about something that we have to confront in our work or in our life, it's because it's becoming very concrete and fixed, isn't it? Very solid. And the more solid it appears, then the easier it is to get stuck on it. And stuck can be good, it can be with pleasure or with dread. I'm just dreading my relatives coming this week, like that. Well, the relatives aren't even in front of you. What's in front of you is a mental image of your relatives. And that mental image is appearing to us as fixed and permanent, unchanging. Okay, when you see things are changing instant to instant, then everything becomes easygoing. Lama uses the example of a married couple. And again, ego interprets that we'll be together forever. And someone says, one of you is going to die before the other one. People don't like hearing that, do they? Because the ego fixates that we're going to be together forever. Oh, don't talk about that right now. That's a long way off. So that way of thinking sets us up for a lot of suffering. The more and the stronger we hang on to that concept, it's not even what is a concept, but it's not even, it's just like by default. By default, we sit and we look at our partner and we get married. You're not thinking about this thing is going to end with one of us dying before the other one. But that's the fact. And people say, well, that's a really negative fact. Why are you focusing on that? Well, when my dad died, I would swear I wouldn't want to be my mom at that point. I don't want to set myself up. My mom didn't know what to do. I remember her holding on his feet as, you know, he was unconscious, and just saying, this isn't the way we had planned it. This isn't the way it was supposed to be. And it's very common. Yeah, and my mom developed she died this year, but developed very advanced Alzheimer's, much more advanced than, you know, typically you don't live that long. And we all my siblings agreed that it seemed to get really pronounced after my dad died, because I have this idea that there's some sort of trauma, that emotional and psychological trauma, that one maybe triggered something in her brain. I don't know. This is my superstition, but it's kind of like a mental trauma maybe contributed to her dementia, or onset of dementia. So I think I'd rather prepare for my wife's or my death than have to just try and deal with it when it happens. I think it makes me appreciate her more. I think it makes me appreciate this moment more. It makes me think, you know, when I see that time is going to come, then why am I arguing about not wanting to do the dishes? Why am I arguing about her, you know, being short with me? Right? It's all changing, moving. It's gone. All those fights we've had with our loved ones and enemies, it's all gone. That's impermanence. So when the opportunity to have an argument with someone comes up and you remember that, everything changes, doesn't it? Then we're more easygoing. Okay. So the tighter we grasp to our partner, our loved ones, our friends, what happens? So in Buddhist practice and philosophy, there's this idea you often hear about renunciation. So monks and nuns, of course, we should have lots of respect for what they're trying to do. But just becoming a monk or nun doesn't mean you're all of a sudden you're renounced. You have renunciation. That's the purpose of becoming it. So real renunciation is not a physical thing. And as Lama has said, it's an intelligent decision. And it's a mental state based upon understanding reality. So when I say, you know, renounce your partner, it doesn't mean get a divorce. It means renounce the attachment to your belief around partnership. It's just an intelligent decision, because the reality is it's hard to find, where's this partner I'm in love with? And I mean, we know it's very complex, isn't it? I'm in love with my wife, but then you start analyzing, well, what do you mean? Which part? And that sort of thing. We'll get into that in the last couple of classes, hopefully, right? In the liberation part of this class. So we're just renouncing the ego and attachments strategy. So it's very important, that last bullet point. We're not renouncing our partner. We're not renouncing our car. We're not renouncing Western lifestyle. We're not renouncing our house. We're not renouncing our career. We're not renouncing our children. You know, we're renouncing ego and attachment strategy towards relating to all those things. We're being set up that those are the things that our happiness comes from, because I want the pleasure of them or to avoid the discomfort, one of the two. And that's how I make my life. Last thing, I had a client I see yesterday, husband and wife, they're elderly couple. And the husband told me that since his son moved back in with him, I think his son is something like 32 years old, The father spends 14 hours a day in his den, his man cave. He doesn't want to come out and face the sun. They don't get along. Then he said, then the other 8 hours, I sleep. You know, makes you want to cry. That's life. So he needs to renounce something there. Okay. Okay, friends. If you do have we didn't do a meditation. I was very bad. Is there anything you would like to chime in on before we leave?
So I have a question about the client you were talking about with the sun moving in.
Sure.
Was like kicking him out was an option?
Kicking him out was an option. So I really appreciate it. So, so that helps explain. Kicking him out is an option, and we're not saying you never do anything. But in the context of this class and this philosophy, that's focusing on blaming the object.
Mm.
So the renunciation here would be something like, it has to be a mental, renouncing a mental process. So we could say, I'm going to simplify this. I don't really know what it is. So we could say, I want it my way. And that's why I'm staying in my room, because, you know, my son is always in my way. He's very intrusive. He's demanding. He's critical. He picks on me, right? And yeah, you might have to kick him out, but that's not gonna produce any happiness, long-term happiness. It's a Band-Aid. Just like Barbara has to, you know, put a splint on someone's arm who breaks their arm, right, in the emergency room. But that's not the solution to the suffering of, you know, the suffering happens within the mind. So my client's suffering is in the mind. So he needs to renounce something in his mind that would reduce the suffering. Maybe it would be that his son has to follow his directions all the time, or that the son, it has to be, you know, the dad's, it has to be my way or the highway. So the dad is attached. Giving up attachment would mean giving up the attachment to my house being my way in a certain way. You know, put your clothes away, clean your room, you know, cook your own food, all that. So the attachment is to a belief in how things should be. So the renunciation would be, I'm going pretty fast here, you know, I might be wrong, but it's something like, you know, renounce the way you think things should be so that you can be happy. Okay? Something like that. It's a good question. Thank you. We always think kicking the person out is the answer. You know, fire the person. Yeah, you're having trouble at work, fire them. And then you fire everybody pretty soon. Right? It doesn't solve the problem. Anything else? Okay. Let me just get rid of this. Okay. So thank you, everybody. And just like we motivated in the beginning, we got to do dedication as well. So dedicating, same thing as karma. I mean, it's like intention. It is intention. And we cast our intention or a dedication over this time we spent together, you know, just thinking about things. That's good enough. Just considering. It doesn't mean accepting. Just reflecting and considering is our job as practitioners and as people curious. Just stay curious. And I'm going to put aside, you know, I think the analogy or the example of a bank, you know, when you put money in the bank. So we just put money in the bank the last hour. And then what we can do is if it's just in your checking account, then it's probably going to be spent for, you know, immediate things. And then the money just gets spent. Or you put in the bank and say, this is for college education or for a new car, or this is being spent, put away for retirement. So these mental imprints we're putting away so that they ripen into fuller understanding of our mind's potential. Fuller understanding, complete understanding our mind's potential so that we can be greatest benefit to helping our loved ones, our family, our friends, helping our enemies, helping the world at large, whether it's a world in conflict that we agree with or disagree with, it doesn't matter. Everyone fundamentally is experiencing the same sadness, the same struggles, same challenges. So let's, eventually become one of those beings that helps with all beings with their challenges, like religious and saints that have existed over time. Saint Francis, Jesus, Buddha, Shantideva, Nagarjuna, Ramana Maharshi, these beings who were outside the ordinary description and focused on using their extraordinary qualities to be a benefit, not just disappearing and enjoying themselves. That's also an option. So you decide what you want to dedicate these imprints toward. Okay. Thank you. Good afternoon, good night, good morning. Thank you, Anil, for helping us. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Vanessa.
Thank you, Karuna.
Thank you.